Light the fuse.
Hi, I'm Adam Nayman with another Ringer video essay. By now we've all seen the scene from Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning where Tom Cruise drives a motorcycle off a cliff into a sort of skydive parachute thing. They put it online last December as a way of promoting the movie, and obviously it's going to work since Dead Reckoning is set to be one of the biggest hits of the summer. Tom Cruise's transformation into a millennial Evel Knievel is one of those developments that you probably didn't see coming back in the 1980s, and it's amazing how long he's sustained this sort of death-defying version of his career. Like no action star since Jackie Chan, Cruise has turned reckless endangerment into an aesthetic, and as a result, he's given the Mission Impossible films sort of credibility that's unimpeachable. The things that Ethan Hunt is doing seem impossible, isn't that sort of the point? Now, it would have been possible to make a list of the most dangerous and amazing stunts in film history that included several Cruise titles, since he's also sort of cultivated this daredevil thing in the most recent Top Gun movie and elsewhere. In the interest of diversity and historical perspective, though, our top 10 is drawing from a number of different moments in movie history. What unites the titles on our list is a very real sense of risk, both to famous people and below-the-line stunt people. And it's a risk that's antithetical to the idea of movie magic, but it's also essential to the conjuring of that magic. In a moment where audiences are suffering from CGI fatigue, a sort of wariness of all kinds of artificiality, these films and their stunt crews sit majestically on the near side of the uncanny valley. And they prove, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, especially physically speaking, that when it comes to suspension of disbelief, there's no substitute for seeing bodies in motion, and also the maxim that what goes up must come down. So here's our list of 10 of the greatest or most dangerous or most amazing stunt sequences in film history. In the 1920s, as movies become the dominant art form and entertainment form in North American life, no movie star commanded more respect or autonomy over his own choices than Buster Keaton, who not only produced, directed, and starred in a series of proto-blockbuster slapstick comedies, but insisted on performing his own stunts. The contrast between Keaton's stoic, deadpan on-screen persona, which earned him the nickname of the Great Stoneface, and the white-knuckle realities of his risk-taking are the stuff of Hollywood legend. And in 1928's Steamboat Bill, the comedian took it further than ever before. Building on sight gags that he'd kind of rehearsed in a pair of earlier hits called Backstage in 1 Week, Keaton arranged in Steamboat Bill for an entire building facade to collapse all around him in one non-faked, non-jerry-rigged take. The joke was that instead of dodging the lethal wreckage, his character would just stand still, rooted to the spot, while the house sort of fell around him. It's been claimed that Keaton hit his mark using nothing more than a nail on the ground, and that had he stood even a couple of inches in the wrong direction, he would have been crushed by this solid brick wall. I was mad at the time, or I never would have done the thing, Keaton admitted years later, but his moment of madness set the bar for on-screen stunt work dauntingly high. And you could argue on some level that it's never been equaled since. Few movies have a production history as dark as The Wizard of Oz, which unfolded amongst rumors of all kinds of on-set abuse of star Judy Garland, who was given uppers and downers and drugs to manage her eating and sleeping habits. The movie also launched conspiracy theories, which have since been debunked, about the suicide of a crew member and the visibility of his corpse in the final cut of the movie. The most harrowing factual anecdotes, though, involve Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West, and her stunt double Betty Danko, both of whom were incredibly intrepid and both of whom suffered serious injuries during the shoot in scenes that might seem innocuous to us now, but were, really not carefully regulated or protected at all. In the scene where we first see the Wicked Witch of the West appear in a puff of red smoke, Danko, who was waiting beneath the ground of the set in a trap door to pop out and hit her cue, actually had a crew member fall into that compartment directly onto her shoulder, nearly breaking it or separating it. Later on, Hamilton and Danko suffered severe burns when various props wielded by the witch malfunctioned, and Danko ended up spending 11 days in hospital after one sort of fiery mishap. In later years, Hamilton told an interviewer that she was planning to sue MGM for the things that happened to her, but if she had, given the times, she'd have never worked in Hollywood again. Instead, she returned to set on the condition that she didn't have to deal with any more pyrotechnics. When Titanic won 11 awards in 1998, it tied the all-time record held by 1959's Ben-Hur, a religious epic starring Charlton Heston as a Jewish prince sold into slavery whose narrative eventually intersects with the life of Jesus Christ. The film is most famous for its centerpiece chariot race sequence, which took nearly a year to prepare and featured nearly 7,000 cheering extras in an amphitheater set that was at the time both the largest and most expensive physical location ever built for a motion picture. There were actually riots when potential extras were sent away on shooting days, since the local population, for both reasons of enthusiasm and economics, was very, very interested in getting itself on camera. Both Heston and his co-star Stephen Boyd studied and practiced how to pilot actual horse-drawn chariots, and Boyd even allowed himself to be dragged beneath his character's chariot with reinforced steel armor under his costume. A moment where stuntman Joe Canute, a legendary figure, was thrown into the air, narrowly avoiding serious injury, survived into the movie's final cut. Meanwhile, there were rumors that another rider was killed during filming. That's a story that circulated widely in the years after Ben-Hur came out. Those stories have been widely, although not definitively, reputed. Beyond the obvious physical difficulty of Ben-Hur's chariot race, the scene has endured as an incredibly influential stunt sequence in terms of its imagery and design. It's been paid homage and parodied countless times across different forms of media, whether a kind of sci-fi riff in the 1970s B-movie Death Race 2000, or direct allusions on episodes of The Simpsons. Ow! It's difficult to choose just one stunt from the James Bond franchise, and a case could be made here that we are ignoring the dam plunge at the opening of GoldenEye, or the leap from the construction crane in Casino Royale, whose pre-credit sequence is just filled with incredible physical comedy and stunt work. But the witty comic book elegance in 1977's The Spy Who Loved Me gets the choice here, because it's so well executed and so perfectly in character for cinema's slickest secret agent. After seeing an ad for Canadian Club Whiskey and Playboy featuring a sort of laissez-faire daredevil skier, Michael G. Wilson, the stepson of Bond mogul Albert Broccoli, tracked down the guy who was in the photo, who turned out to be Rick Sylvester. And Sylvester's so-called ski base jump was his own invention, which meant that he could offer it to the Bond team at a price and a chance at cinematic immortality. The film's crew proceeded to the 6,000-foot summit of Mount Asgard, where amid frigid temperatures, raging winds, mounting anxiety over both the risk of the stunt and the difficulty of photographing it, Sylvester pulled it off in one terrifying take, which the cameras almost missed, but, managed to capture just within the frame, punctuated by the opening of a parachute displaying the Union Jack. That's the witty touch that, only James Bond could get away with. The jump remains one of the most crowd-pleasing moments in any Bond movie, a testament to Sylvester's unfathomable guts, and definitely the most exciting movie moment ever inspired by Canadian Club Whiskey. In every single behind-the-scenes account of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Steven Spielberg and stuntmaster Terry Leonard talked about paying homage to Yakima Canute, an incredibly influential stuntman who went back to the days of John Ford and Stagecoach and who worked on the chariot scene in Ben-Hur. It took 8 weeks of filming to do the truck chase in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it was a sequence that endangered stunt people and stars alike. Harrison Ford actually took a turn being dragged behind the moving truck. The bulk of the dangerous stuff, though, was done by Terry Leonard. He was the one who actually crawled underneath the vehicle, which had been rebuilt so that its carriage sat higher off the ground. And he's the one who pulled himself out the other end while traveling at a high speed, although it wasn't that high. The sequence was shot at a slightly lower frame rate to create the impression of fast motion. This is a stunt sequence that a lot of movies have tried to copy and live up to, including the most recent Indiana Jones film, The Dial of Destiny, which has a de-aged Harrison Ford, throwing himself around in homage to Raiders. But the weightlessness of the sequence is largely achieved with CGI. It doesn't have that same rough, ready feeling that you had back in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The magnificent, all-out, seemingly endless car chase that climaxes The Road Warrior did not go smoothly. If you watch George Miller's 1982 action masterpiece, you kind of can't believe there weren't harsher casualties, because what you're watching is very obviously quite real. In a behind-the-scenes supplement, you can actually see stuntman Gary Norris break his leg after piloting a motorcycle directly into the back of a wrecked car. The shot made it into the movie, but Norris sat out the rest of the shoot, and thankfully his injuries were limited to a broken leg. Amazingly, the Mack truck crash that provides the biggest bang in the film didn't hurt anybody. The driver was a guy named Dennis Williams. He was not a professional stuntman. He was a driver who simply met with Miller and the crew and talked about being able to do the kind of driving necessary. He had years of experience helming big rigs up and down the outback, and as it turned out, he pulled it off without a hitch. Nearly 30 years later, Miller would insist on a similarly risky set of stunts for Mad Max Fury Road, extending the franchise's flesh and blood stunt legacy into the 21st century and setting it apart from the crop of hugely CG-driven action movies which just could not match its authenticity. Before breaking through as a global action headliner, Jackie Chan was a stunt performer on a series of Bruce Lee hits. And few actors have ever had his mix of bravery, finesse, and agility, and then when he finally got to be in the spotlight as the star of films, he demonstrated sort of a charisma to rival Bruce Lee as well. Chan has mostly had good luck, considering that nearly every movie he made at the peak of his stardom contained a scene or two or three or four that could have easily killed him. None more obviously than 1985's masterpiece Police Story, a peerless comic thriller that doubles as a study in suicidal ideation. There are things that Chan does in this movie that nobody in his life would have advised him to do, maybe outside of the movie makers. Near the end of the film, Chan's character is chasing a group of criminals through a massive shopping mall, and he slides down a pole covered in glass lights. He's trying to sort of narrow the distance between himself and the criminals. In addition to the fact that Chan leapt onto the pole without benefit of any supportive wires or safety net, the lights hanging on the pole, which were at least switched off, had heated the metal to an unsafe degree. So somehow Chan managed to keep his hands on the pole despite the scalding temperatures, resulting in serious burns. And that scenario was preferable to the broken neck that would have surely occurred if he had let go.
I just ordinary people, I'm not a Superman.
Later on during the shooting, Chan had to be hospitalized after falling through and breaking a massive glass partition. In later years, especially after some of his movies started being distributed and even made in the United States, Chan would include footage of every injury he suffered during shooting, big and small, as end credit blooper reels. And these were supposed to let everybody take a deep breath and know he was okay. Although if you've ever watched Chan's blooper reels, it's not really a relief. It's actually incredibly brutal every time you see him take a fall that looks harder than it should be. Stuntman Simon Crane ended up in the Guinness Book of World Records for his high-altitude antics on the set of Cliffhanger, where he actually moved between two jets at an altitude of 15,000 feet. Both planes were traveling exactly 150 miles an hour. They had to keep their speed equal right down to the last mile per hour, lest the force of the wind tear Crane apart. The actor had two parachutes set up ready in case of an accident, but he admitted in interviews later that he very easily could have died at several points. There was a gust of wind that actually bounced him off the plane door and sent him sliding along the roof for a couple of moments towards the engine before he was able to regain his equilibrium and complete the shot. He maneuvered himself to safety, finished the sequence, deployed his parachute, and left the film's director and editors with the raw material to complete a singularly thrilling sequence and to sort of put himself in the unofficial Stuntman Hall of Fame. Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof is one of the most personal films that QT has ever made, and it contains probably the most self-reflexive stunt sequence in movie history. The film's narrative follows a stunt woman named Zoe Bell, just playing a version of herself, Zoe Bell. She decides to perform a legendarily dangerous stunt called the ship's mast while joyriding with some pals. The conceptual joke is that in order to tell a story about Bell risking her life by doing the ship's mast, which means being lashed to the hood of a moving car, Tarantino actually had to have Zoe Bell do the ship's mast, which makes her vulnerable both within the narrative world of the story, where she's then chased by a kamikaze serial killer stuntman, Mike, played by Kurt Russell, and also just made her vulnerable in reality to the risks and contingencies of clinging to a moving car. It reportedly took 6 weeks to film the ship's mass sequence. Bell was lashed to the Dodge Charger hood at speeds of 80 miles per hour. It's incredibly exciting on screen, but there's a sobering subtext to it. A lot of people have read Death Proof, especially in recent years, as a sort of gesture of self-critique or auto-critique concerning Tarantino's misconduct and neglect on the set of Kill Bill, where Uma Thurman was injured driving into a tree. The mix of guilt and exhilaration bleeding through Death Proof's grimy grindhouse surfaces is uncanny. The end result is that it makes Bell look like a real-life superhero. Even though Stuntman Mike is the one who builds the custom car where the movie gets its title, Bell is the true emblem of being Death Proof. It is hard to pinpoint exactly when Tom Cruise's main job switched from being the world's biggest movie star to the modern incarnation of Buster Keaton. The fetish for authenticity that has led the actor to risk his life in a series of gravity-defying and basically uninsurable stunts now looks like it's going to end up defining his career, way more than the sort of Ray-Ban wearing cool kid persona he cultivated in the 80s and 90s. It's been rumored for a long time that Cruise has wanted to make a Harry Houdini biopic, and that would be the role of a lifetime for him. The first time that Cruise really captured global headlines for this DIY stuntman stuff was Mission Impossible 2, where he scaled a sheer rock face with his bare hands. He then would go on to top himself in Ghost Protocol, where he scaled Dubai's Burj Khalifa skyscraper with just a pair of suction gloves and a strategically hidden harness. In later installments, Cruise would go on to integrate halo jumps and record-setting acts of breath-holding, but the vertiginous spectacle of Ethan Hunt scuttling across the Burj Khalifa and that sheer steel and glass verticality of it is something that in visual terms probably can't be topped, at least until Dead Reckoning. Are there any stunts that we forgot? Do any of these stunts leave you unimpressed? As always, let us know what you think in the comments, and hopefully we'll see you guys again soon.